Hello, everyone. Welcome to biology class. This is Mr. Vallejo. Today, we'll be taking a look at plant classification. So in today's topic, we're going to look at the animal kingdom. Remember, in classification, we know that there are 6 kingdoms, and we've already looked at the 2 bacteria kingdoms, the Protista and the fungi. And now we'll take a look at the kingdom Plantae, the classification of the plants. So we start off with, before we take a look at some of or how they're classified, we'll take a look at some interesting things about plants. Now, plants are very important to humans. Plants give us comfort, and plants have for a long time. Fossilized pollen found on burial sites. We've been doing that for a long time. Flowers on graves for more than 35,000 years. There have been fossilized pollen found on grave sites, so that's how we know that. Not only do plants give us comfort, but they give us food. But this is an interesting number to me. Only 1,000 out of 350,000 species of plants that we have classified are used for food. Most of those are cereals and fruits, and my graphic is a cereal with fruit in it. Plants have been cultivated for not so long. About 11,000 years ago, humans stopped in one place and started to grow stuff. So began about 11,000 years ago in the Middle East, the beginning of fertilization in this area right here known as the Fertile Crescent. This is the location of modern day Iraq right here, which is kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? Selected desirable traits. What we did, what we have been doing, what we continue to do is we select desirable traits. That's called artificial selection. And so as we do that, we can obtain plants that have the characteristics that we are most interested in. For example, you want a plant that doesn't break easily in the wind. So wild sheep breaks easily in the wind. Select those that don't and then mate them together. And as time goes along, you will have a stronger and stronger stock. Most of the foods that we have are from a particular family in the kingdom Plantae. That's the family Gramineae. That's the grass family, and those are the cereals. These make good foods because these are rich in carbohydrates, so they make a very good energy source. More than half the world's cultivated land is devoted to wheat, rice, and corn. And so I wonder if you could guess what number 4 is. And if you guess soybeans, that is the correct answer. Very interesting. Fruits. Fruits are actually defined as plant ovaries, mature plant ovaries that contain seeds. So a fruit is a specialized package for the seeds. The fruits are desirable, fruits are pretty, fruits are ingenious, and they're all packages to deliver seeds. Moreover, grains are the fruits of the cereal plants. So when we say that you need a certain amount of whole grain in your diet, those grains are the fruits of the plants in the family Gramineae. So as you can see, fruits are very important, especially grains. Now the study of agriculture is very important because some would say that we have too many people And because we have too many people, we may not have enough food. And if you take a look at some amazing numbers, some of you were alive when we had less than 6 billion people on Earth. We now have more than 7 billion people on Earth in the United States. In 2012, we had 313 million. In the world, we had 7 billion people. That's pretty amazing. Right now, what do we have? Let's take a look. Today, on March 31st, 2020, the United States is the third largest country population-wise at 330, and the world population is getting closer to 7.7 billion people in the world today. So let's go back and take a look at the history of agriculture. 1950s, 1970s, known as the Green Revolution, an important event. Norman Borlaug of the International Rice Institute in the Philippines. My mom used to call it the PI. And my dad was in the Army, and you heard of GI Joe. So my mom used to call my dad the GI from the PI. Borlaug and his team developed rice with heavy heads and adapted to tropical regions. So they actually gave him the Nobel Peace Prize for heading up the group that developed that. In third world countries, you have issues that you need fertilizer because the soil in the tropics is notoriously nutrient poor. This is, as a side trip, this is why in the 90s it was such a good idea to go out in the tropical rainforest and burn a patch of it and then dig those ashes back in the soil, and then the soil had a little bit more nutrients in it. Then you can grow crops, and they might last for 3, 4, 5 years, but hey, you just do it again. Move 5 miles down and burn some more, and that's what was happening. Uh, so you need fertilizer with the poor soil in the tropics, and most of these countries can't afford to buy that fertilizer, so it's cost prohibitive. Um, During the 70s, we have the development of fertilizers and even pesticides, but that too became an issue as farm workers would stand out in the field, and then not just fertilizers, but pesticides would be sprayed on them by the crop dusters. So, if you'll recall, Cesar Chavez, um, Cesar Chavez and his calls, "Si se puede," um, was a United Farm Worker leader that fought for the rights of farm workers. If you recall, he marched over 300 miles from Del, Delano in central California, all the way up to the Capitol uh, to give publicity to the plight of the farm workers. This button here, I used to have a bumper sticker that said this: "Uvas, no!" So no grapes. And in the 70s, we boycotted grapes for a while uh, to, again, call to the plight of the farm workers. And this is clever. We have the Green Revolution, we have the Second Green Revolution, and then we have the Gene Revolution from 1990 on. That's when we use biotechnology and genetic engineering to make transgenics. Transgenics are novel genetic hybrids right there. And you can see, you can take a plasmid and uh, take the gene that you're interested in, put it in a plasmid, and then stick it in a plant cell. And that would transform the plant cell, and then you can grow that in a cell culture. So there's all kinds of fun things we can do now. It is possible to grow insulin, not just in a vat of bacteria, but you can have some plants grow insulin, which is pretty neat. You can have some plants in their DNA be resistant to pests, which allows farmers to reduce pesticides. So all kinds of good things happen. Now, really what we should be concentrating on is solving world hunger. And there are famines. There are parts of the world that don't get enough water, that don't get enough rain from the skies, don't have enough drinking water, clean drinking water. So in many countries, root crops are good choices, like cassava. Cassava can be grown in dry areas without fertilization or irrigation systems. So plants are useful. Plants make us feel good. Plants are food, but plants are also our source of pharmaceuticals. Aspirin comes from the bark of a willow tree. It's called the foxglove. And this is digitalis, where we get some heart medicine. And we also wear cotton. Everything I'm wearing today is cotton, linen from flax. So we can turn that into material that is useful for our lives. That's why we should study plants. But let's take a look at the classification of plants then. And so here's a graphic that shows us what's called the phylogeny of plants. You can see how they branch off from an ancestral green algae here, and then you can see the different groups. Now, earlier we learned about taxonomy and kingdoms and divisions, class, orders, family, genera. Well, although that is also true for plants, there is also a non-taxonomic form of classification that is widely used. And so we have a lot of branching in tubes, and it works like this. Plants are divided up into non-vascular and vascular plants. Then the vascular plants are divided up into seedless plants and seeded plants. Then the seeded plants are divided up into gymnosperms and angiosperms. And then the angiosperms are divided into monocots and dicots. So what are all these things? Well, a bryophyte is a moss or a liverwort, that you can see in the photo here. And we call them non-vascular because they don't have any tubes, so non-vascular. But because they don't have these tubes, they can't be really tall because the water just soaks in. They say that if a plant didn't have tubes, the tallest it could be, if a tree didn't have tubes, the tallest it could be would be 4 feet. And as you know, there are redwoods in California that are 450 feet tall. There are huge sequoia trees in Yosemite and in Sequoia National Park. So non-vascular plants are the bryophytes. Now, other plants are vascular plants. Vascular plants do have these tubes. These tubes carry water and food. The tubes that carry water are called the xylem, and the tubes that carry food are called the phloem. So we have seedless plants, which are vascular plants, and then we have the seeded plants. So the seedless plants are the ferns, and this is giving you an overview, and we'll go over these in much more detail after we go through these fairly quickly. Then we have the seeded plants, which are the gymnosperms and angiosperms. The gymnosperms here, the name gymnosperm, those are the conifers, the evergreen trees. The name gymnosperm is derived from the idea that the Romans and the Greeks, they went to the gym just like you and I do. We go to 24 Crunch or wherever you work out. But instead of wearing sweats or spandex or basketball shorts or whatever you're wearing these days, they didn't wear anything. They wore their birthday suits. So they were naked. So gymno, naked, sperm, the seed. So gymnosperms, the conifers, are the naked seeds. The gymnosperms have no cover on the seed. So these are pine seeds. These are the wings that are on pine seeds. If you've ever played with one of these, you might put it up high, when you're camping, and then let go, and it flutters down to the ground. And so that's called a samara. These are the naked seeds. Gymnosperms have no flowers. Pine trees, spruce trees, they don't have flowers. And so you also have the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. The angiosperms are flowering plants, and the flowering plants are also subdivided, but they're divided into what we call the monocots and the dicots. I'll explain that more in a little bit. Now, as far as reproduction goes, these plants exhibit alternation of generation. We've seen alternation generation in other kingdoms. Fungi also go through alternation of generation. Protista, many go through the alternation generations. Even in the animal kingdom, we'll see that some organisms go through an alternation of generation. Well, what is that? Very generally, you can see that you have an alternation of generation, that every other generation changes. So it goes from diploid to haploid, from haploid to diploid, and back and forth. But also, it's not just diploid, haploid, but it's sporophyte and gametophyte. So a sporophyte is a plant that comes from a spore, and a gametophyte is a plant that comes from gametes. So a gametophyte is a plant that is the product of fertilization, and over here we see that a sporophyte is a plant that is the result of meiosis. And then we also see sexual versus asexual, asexual, sexual, sexual, asexual, and so we have the alternation of generation in 3 different ways. Here's a more detailed diagram, and so you can see the sporophyte and the gametophyte. The gametophyte is the one that produces spores here, and the sporophyte produces spores. So the gametophyte, there are male and female gametophytes. The male gametophyte is called the antheridium. The part on the flower is called, the male part of the flower is called the anther, and the archegonium is where the eggs are. So when the sperm and egg come together through fertilization, you get a fertilized egg called the zygote. Well, then that forms the other plant called the sporophyte. So what you're going to see in higher plants is you're going to see that there is that one of these generations is more dominant, and in higher and higher plants, what we see is the sporophyte is the dominant, and the gametophyte is hard to find. In lower plants, it's the other way around. The gametophyte is the dominant generation, and the sporophyte is hardly found. We'll see that in some diagrams that are coming up. So the archegonium contains an egg, and then again, as I just said, there's diploid dominance. The sporophyte is the dominant form or stage in higher plants. And so those are some key points in alternation and generation. There are many types of spores, not a single type like in ferns. So here's a diagram, shows you the life cycle of the moss. And you can see right here, when we think of moss, we think of green things on the ground or maybe on some trees or something in a really moist environment, moist, cold environment. But here, if you've ever noticed this little brown structure coming out on top of the green plant, those little brown structures are where the spores come from. So the spore actually lives on the gametophyte, and the gametophyte then is going to make gametes, and after it makes gametes, and you have the fertilization of the zygote, of the egg to make the zygote. Well, then that grows into the sporophyte, and that sporophyte can be found living on top of the gametophyte. So here in lower plants, the gametophyte is the dominant, but as we go higher and higher, we're going to see that it reverses. So seedless vascular plants are ferns. A fern frond is like a leaf. This is a photo of the underside of a fern frond, and under the fern frond, you have sori. One is called a sorus, and you have spores inside each of those sori. Here's the life cycle of the fern. This is probably the one that you recognize, and that is making spores. So it's a sporophyte generation. But this one, maybe you don't notice. In the dirt, a few millimeters high, sometimes quite small, is this gametophyte. And this is a necessary part of the life cycle of the fern. Okay, these guys are gametophytes, so they make gametes, and you can see over here, here's the egg, and then here's the sperm. Fertilization occurs, and that's how you get the main part of the life cycle, which is the sporophyte. So the sporophyte is now dominant. In gymnosperms are the conifers that are seen in massive amounts in Russia and China, northern part of China, in Canada. Yeah, last time I went to Canada, these things would not stop. They are all over the place. And so those are evergreen plants. You can probably, I'm looking out my window right now and looking at several of them. Well, you also have another type of gymnosperm called a ginkgo. I used to have one in my front yard at my old house. And the ginkgo, you may remember ginkgo. It has a very distinct leaf pattern. But also, ginkgo biloba was a common uh, nutrient supplement, uh, and it, I never took it, but my friend Tom Roach, moved to Texas. But now, I remember asking Tom once, Tom, how is that ginkgo biloba working out for you? And he said, not so good, because I never remember to take it. Ginkgo biloba is supposed to help with your memory, Tom. Isn't that a funny? Now, another thing about ginkgo is that they create these fruits and they look like berries, and you can see they're not that big, but they are very pungent. And so during a couple weeks of the year, my wife would always yell at the kids if they came in with this on their feet because it really smelled just like fresh dog potty. And uh, and so my kids, when they were little, they used to call this stuff poop fruit. So ginkgos do that. Um, Gymnosperms also are made up of the conifers. Those are the ones we usually see. There's a little spruce tree right there with the moose behind it, which reminds me to tell you that because these go all across Canada and then all the way across the northern part of Europe and the northern part of Russia and China and over there, it goes all the way around the earth and the northern latitudes. They call that the spruce moose belt. And there's a picture of a spruce and a moose. Then we have the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. Flowering plants are classified according to the number of cotyledons. Those are the baby seeds or the seed leaves. If you have one that's monocot. And if you have two, you have the dicots. So that was a quick introduction to angiosperms. Oh, there's more. Here's dicots. Dicots are in groups of 5 and have a net-like venation. Their leaves are pinnate and palmate. But monocots are going to have, like in this picture right here, parallel venation, like you see in a lily plant, like you see in a grass, like you see in corn. You have straight up and down lines like that. Monocots have plant parts in multiples of 3. So to close up today, what I'd like you to do is take out your chart that looks like this one. We're going to fill it out together. This chart will give us an idea of the derived characteristics of plants. And we've seen all the information that's coming up after this once already, but we're going to quickly take a look at that information more specifically so that we could complete this chart. So let's take a look at it. Now, the first one is the ancestor right here. What about the ancestor? It's right there, the ancestral green algae. And it says, did all plants arise from a common ancestral green algae? Many biologists think that is the case. These are very simple. They have no vascular tissue, no alternation and generation. Remember, these guys are protista. They are part of the protista, the algae or the plant-like protists. So they don't have vascular tissue. They don't go through alternation and generation. They have no seeds at all. So if you take a look at your chart, if you can complete it like that, just it's minus all the way across, or no if you want to write no in there. Well, the mosses, remember, have no tubes and the water just soaks in. Those are the mosses and the liverworts at the bottom of our chart. So they have no tubes, they have no vascular tissue. Vascular plants do have that vascular tissue, which are the tubes. Those are the seedless plants, and the seeded plants are both vascular tissue plants. So there are the seeded plants, and then here's the unseeded vascular plants, the ferns. And remember, the mosses do not have any vascular tissue. Well, those ferns are seedless. And there are seeded plants, the Gymnosperms and Angiosperms. And the Gymnosperms have a naked seed, so they don't have a seed coat. And the Angiosperms do have a seed coat. And there are 2 different types of Angiosperms. There's a Monocots and a Dicots. So as we fill out the chart, let's first take a look at the alternation and generation. Remember, we've seen this slide before, the 3 different ways that things alternate in generations in the plant kingdom. So the alternation and generation is seen in all plants, but not in those algae. Remember, algae are not even plants. There's a very good graphic of the alternation and generation and the important points of the alternation and generation that we've already gone over. So when we take a look at our chart, then we know that the ancestral algae have no alternation and generation. As far as vascular tissue, we've already completed that. Alternation and generation is seen in all plants, okay, except not in the ancestral algae. Here's the life cycle of the moss. Now, the important thing from here is that the moss has no seeds, only spores. So as we take a look at our chart again, we can fill that in. Mosses have no seeds. Ferns also do not have seeds. They have spores. So those spores are on the thori. Here's a graphic we've already seen. And this shows the alternation generation where the sporophyte is the dominant form. So they do have alternation generation in ferns. And they do have vascular tissue, but they don't have any seeds. So as we take a look at our chart, what we want to fill in right here is that there are no seeds. The gymnosperms, remember, include the ginkgo and the conifers. Those seeds are naked they have no seed cover, and Gymnosperms show that alternation of generation. So you can see right here, we have the conifers, the Gymnosperms, showing alternation in generation. And then as far as conifers go, conifers have a naked seed without a cover. And then finally, the angiosperms do show alternation in generation. They do have vascular tissue, and they have a seed coat. That seed coat is called a testa. I remember that from when I was in high school biology doing a dissection of a germinating corn seed. Angiosperms are classified according to the number of cotyledons. Remember, if you have one, you're a monocot. If you have two, you're a dicot. So now we should be able to complete our chart by doing that. Angiosperms have seeds, and those seeds have a cover. Alrighty, so this is information that we've already gone over here, monocot and dicot. Hopefully you got that completed chart. Here it is once again, and that semantics features analysis grid for those of you who are education majors really comes in handy and helps us sum up the important points, the important characteristics when we take a look at plant classification. So guess what? Now you're ready to classify plants. So I want you to complete your drawing of the plant cladogram, which is on the same page as your table that you just completed. And as we leave, let's enjoy the song Classify. I'm Mr. Vallejo. I hope you learned something today in biology class. This was plant classification. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye now. Baby forever.